You shouldn't have to pay taxes on land you own. I commented this on a Reddit thread and got downvoted. Don't really care about that, but the point still stands. At least if you're retired you shouldn't have to pay property taxes on your land. That money is you saved it for your leisure years and it shouldn't go to the state. It's so discouraging. Property taxes are bullshit. You never really own anything, you're just renting it from the government. Agree? I pay over $4,000 in property taxes every year. It chews up most of my savings every year. In fact, I save to pay property taxes. I have very little leisure money. I live paycheck to paycheck. I think that would be a fair trade-off if you also didn't get any government services attached to your land such as roads, electricity, water, etc. I actually think land tax is one of the taxes that makes the most sense. At its essence, what is land ownership? It's basically an exclusive right of use. You can keep people off your land, kick people off your land, keep people from taking stuff off of your land. Ownership is nothing more than the agreement of the masses that you own your land, and they will honor that by staying off of it. The government is the one that enforces this unspoken agreement. You call the police when somebody is trespassing, they are the ones that get you your stolen assets back. The government is the one that keeps people off of the land, and says that you exclusively own the land. Without the government or the enforcement it offers, then ownership would be nothing more than who can physically hold onto that piece of property, but the second someone else drives you off your land, you would have no recourse. Well, I think of it more as a payment for service like defense, roads, mail, police, firefighters, water and sewage, etc. You have to understand where the money is going. Property taxes are the only way that the city/town makes money. So no property taxes equals no police, no schools, shitty roads, etc. I believe that the reason it exists is to give you an incentive to sell land. Otherwise, you would end up with a few people owning pretty much everything and renting it out. That said, I do agree that you shouldn't have to pay for land you live on. I have a bigger issue with inheritance tax. But do you actually own it, eminent domain being what it is? Berman vs. Parker proves what I'm getting at. Washington, D.C. had a fairly blighted area, and came up with a commission and granted it eminent domain to eliminate any cause of blight as well as blighted structures themselves, to be redeveloped. There was a department store that was not blighted, but was in the general neighborhood, and they got the eminent domain slapped on them. They lost their store just to be redeveloped and given to another private entity to profit from. Or even better, Kilo vs. City of New London, where it wasn't even a blighted area, just an area the city wanted to pretty much raise and economically develop by some private redevelopment company, who had a deal to have the 91-acre area of now condemned homes and buildings for the princely sum of $1/year to develop. Never obtained financing, so it was just a large empty lot. Oh yeah, and since the homes had been labeled condemned for 5 years by the time the Supreme Court agreed this was all kosher, and were technically city property that whole time officially, the city threatened to hit all the people living in those homes with 5 years of back rent. A power line needs to run through your lawn? Eminent domain. This railroad looks like a real good idea to be able to quickly ship military goods between a factory and bases on the East Coast, and straight through your house is the only option? Eminent domain. You'll get just compensation. Pro tip: it's almost never fair market value. It's not taxes, it's just a rental fee to a government landlord. If you can prove you maintain the land without government assistance or tax funds, you shouldn't have to pay property tax. I remember reading somewhere that the land you own is never actually yours per se. Technically, it still belongs to the government. If it were truly your land, technically you could create your own mini country and make up your own laws, which is obviously no good. So although you bought it and it's respected as yours, it's still on the government's land. That's why you still must pay taxes and why they still have certain powers over you. Note: I read this a while ago and my memory is hazy on it. I clearly don't have all the details here, so by all means if someone wants to correct me or add to this, then feel free. LMAO, thinking a privatized world is a world without taxes. Americans don't know any history. In Europe we had that for a while, it was called the feudal system, it sucked. Think you own your land? Leave it for a couple years without paying taxes. Spoiler alert, it won't be yours when you get back. In the UK we have something called council tax, which is a tax determined by your property value and the amount of people in your house who earn money. You can get a discount on this tax if you live on your own, 25% I think, might be wrong, or a tax break if you're disabled, have an illness etc. Anyway, I disagree with you because even if you own your property, it's still your local council that pays for your bins to be collected, potholes in the road to be filled and general upkeep for the publicity-owned land that your house, that you may own, sits on. But I disagree, so have an upvote. There is a property tax in the UK called stamp duty. I believe it's for property over £250,000 and it's about 5% of the value. It was introduced in 1694 during the reign of William III and Mary II. The reason? To fund the war against France. Apparently it was so successful that the government continued levying this tax since then. I don't suppose we could ask them for our money back since we haven't fought the French in quite a while. Want to know an even more bullshit tax? Inheritance tax. It's literally a tax on wealth that's already had tax paid for. It's why grandparents spend a lot of money on their kids and grandkids, so that greedy, money-grabbing goofboy don't get a final dip in your earnings. I am upvoting this post because it is truly an unpopular opinion that brings up a good discussion. However, I disagree with your opinion on property tax. It is one of the oldest form of taxes, so there are legitimate reasons for having it. If you were to go back to the Middle Ages, all the lords that own land paid taxes to the king, so some of that money can be used to maintain a military to protect the lands that pays taxes to him. In essence, property tax is still being used the same way today. Property tax pays for the local law enforcement to protect your property from people who may not have the best intentions. Not all problems can be resolved civilly without law enforcement or by yourself. Best case, without law enforcement, you get out of a situation fine, worst case you end up under. I understand that after a whole lifetime paying for a property, you have earned the right to live on that property without concerns of the government levying taxes, and you, who have worked your whole life and earned the rest needed, potentially needing to go back to work to pay for those taxes. However, government services for the property does not end when you retire. At older ages you need law enforcement more than ever to protect your property. You may not be as capable as when you are younger. There is no realistic way of still providing that kind of service without shifting the burden of costs somewhere else. The only way I can see this being a possibility is to have everyone of working age who owns property pay a higher amount of taxes to subsidize for the lack of tax from a retired person. However, this would be putting a burden for your and my children when they need the most help, especially when they just bought a home of their own. Short version, I don't like TLDR, it implies someone is lazy when they just want the point. Property tax pays for local services. Services don't end when you retire. Only way to not need for retired people to not pay for taxes is to shift the burden of cost to the next generation when they need the most help, loans, debt, etc.